Good morning. It's Joe DiBiase. Jeremy is off today. Been a good start to the show here. A lot of good calls on your first Bills game as we head into the final year at the stadium, and asking, those that aren't season ticket holders if they're going to try to make it out for one last trip. Had a couple fans that are going to the Tampa game. Ed McGrogan from the Tennis Channel told us that him and his son are going to the Tampa game actually also for their last trip to the stadium. We bring on Joe Marino, Locked On Bills. We'll get into a lot of good stuff heading into training camp. But Joe, do you remember your first game for the stadium?
Yeah, it was in the mid-'90s. The Bills lost to the Patriots. It was cold. Mm-hmm. We packed sandwiches. They got soggy, and I watched it with my brother and my dad. That's what I remember about it.
Somehow here you are still, though. You're on the.
We made it.
You made it. You're still one fan called in first game was '88 when they tore the goalpost down. It was hard not to be a fan after. I feel like this is more impressive. Soggy sandwiches, cold, they lost, and you're still here following the team.
It's you're born into it. Some of us don't have a choice,
That's right. Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, Locked On NFL Scouting, Bills Squad Show, joining us on the Wester Hotline. On that clip a little bit, Joe, because it actually reminds me of, I think you tweeted out some stats the other day about the Bills and their protection and how often they were doing 5-man protections last year. I did want to get into kind of how the Bills offense might evolve from last year to this year, but this kind of seems like an element that will be a focal point of their offense again. Is 6 offensive linemen, 12 personnel, maybe they'll even run more of it this year?
Yeah, I think there's some identity pieces of the Bills offense and that I expect to carry over year, where I do think you'll see a good amount of heavy personnel, which is multiple tight ends or multiple backs, or continuing to use that 6 offensive linemen. The Bills are very comfortable putting big people on the field, telling the opponent that they're going to run the ball, and not caring, and they're very successful. The Bills had by far the highest EPA per run into heavy boxes, and the Bills will invite those types of things. And here's another thing. The Bills also face the highest percentage of man coverage by a pretty good clip. They also face the highest percentage of one-high middle-of-the-field closed coverages. And this tells a story. This tells a story that teams last year were not impressed with the Bills' wide receiver talent. They were willing to play in man coverage, give you those one-on-ones on the outside, and load up to try to, stop passes to the middle of the field and stop the run. And that was widely unsuccessful, but that was at least strategically what defenses wanted to do against the Bills, right? You're talking massive swings of information here, not middle of the pack. You're talking top of the league. It tells a very clear story. And where the opportunity exists this year is with better receiver talent, hopefully with Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore, you've got better players to separate against man coverage. And if that's true, then you're going to get more split field safeties, which opens up the middle of the field, which is where your best pass catchers can operate, Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, and it gives you better run looks. So if this Bills puzzle of wide receivers works out this year in the way that I think the team hopes, I think it's going to change the narrative of how defenses play the Bills, which I think then creates a more explosive offense. The Bills' offense last year was terrific. They scored a lot of points. They were highly efficient. They were explosive in the run game, but they actually lacked an explosive passing game. I think this structurally could evolve that. And you kind of led this question by talking about the Bills and 5-man protections and the stats that I put up. I'd been suspicious for a long time that the Bills would lead the league, or led the league last year in 5-man blocking surfaces. And what that means is, on any given play, you have 5 offensive linemen, a quarterback, and then you have 5 eligible receivers. So if you use a 5-man blocking surface, that just means that there's no eligible receivers staying into pass block, no tight ends, no running backs. It's your 5 offensive linemen handling the blocking duties. And the advantage there is you maximize the amount of receivers that go out in routes for Josh Allen. And it's not that the Bills didn't face pressure with 5-man protections. They just trusted Josh Allen to figure it out. And he had an all-time great season of not allowing pressure to turn into sacks. I think only 8% of pressure against Josh Allen turned into a sack last year, which is unbelievably low number. That's really rare stuff. And so what the Bills want to do is, number one, maximize the amount of receivers and routes for Josh Allen. But number two, they also know that they have a unicorn quarterback that, well, he can deal with that free rusher, and we've seen it happen time and time again. So the Bills are a unique offense. They do things a little bit different. Obviously, when Josh Allen's your quarterback, it opens up a lot more. We say things like, not everybody can do this. Well, there's the practical application of how when you say, hey, not a lot of teams can do this, not a lot of teams can say, hey, we're going to block with 85% of the time and trust that our quarterback will figure it out, and that way we can have all of our players out in routes. It's a really unique formula, and Josh Allen opens up the whole world of options for the Bills offensively.
Right, him buying time and then just giving the receivers more time to run routes. If their problem is separating, that helps. It really, to go back to your comment about, the Bills against stacked boxes, and if the receivers can, improve from last year to this year, which I think a lot expect to happen with Palmer more, a second-year Coleman. It almost kind of sounds like, Joe, you're setting up a scenario where, as efficient as the Bills were running the ball last year, like if they are dragging teams out of stacked boxes more than last season, we could almost see their run game be even better.
Yeah, I mean, less bodies for James Cook to negotiate when running the football. Yeah, more safeties playing from depth. Yeah, that'd be phenomenal. Yeah, so there's a complementary nature to how the receiver talent can dictate the looks that you get running the football. And, running the ball is just so much oftentimes about math, how many blockers you have versus how many box defenders they have. If you change the math for James Cook because you have better receiving talent that forces more too high coverage shells, yeah, I think you could see a really good rushing offense be even better in 2025.
Joe Marino with us on the on the Wester hotline here. Joe of Locked On Bills. Looking one more on their offense, Joe. You tweeted about their turnovers and on the defensive side of the football, takeaways, getting the ball away from the opponent, which the Bills have been very good at over the last 5 years, and you could speak to that as well. How does that relate offensively and defensively? Like, do you see the success the Bills had on the turnover front, both not turning the ball on offense and getting turnovers on defense? Do they feel equal to you in the likelihood that they would regress? Like, defensively, you've got some numbers that kind of show that, I would not assume that they would regress taking the ball away. But what about on offense for that? It's the whole picture of it.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one of the things I'm really curious about. Defensively, as I tweeted out like right before we started, there's a very consistent, sustained metric for the Bills that they take away the football on defense. They've been in the top 7 every single year for the last 5 of taking a percentage of drives against the Bills defense that result in a takeaway. Mm-hmm. And the reason I tweeted that out is because I was listening to Check the Mic with Sam Monson and Steve Palazzolo, and they did a segment on the Bills, and I thought it was mostly fair. But one of the talking points that was brought up was, hey, turnovers are fluky. They're not a sustainable year-over-year metric. You're talking not turnovers, takeaways, defensive takeaways. Mm-hmm. So these are not year-over-year sustainable metrics. And I'm like, well, maybe that's true, but it's not for the Bills. The last 5 years, they've been in the top 7 of the league, and 4 times in the top 5, 3 times in the top 2. They've been number 1 each of the last 2 seasons. And the last 12 Sean McDermott defenses, that of course dates back to Carolina, have been in the top 10 of total takeaways. So yeah, maybe that's true for most teams, but it's not for Sean McDermott. And you hear him talk about, like, hey, you get what you emphasize. Clearly, whatever emphasizing is happening across different teams, different players, Sean McDermott gets takeaways, and that's a big deal. So yes, I feel like that can sustain itself. The other side of the equation is giveaways. Can the Bills maintain their low giveaway offense that they had last year? I'm not as confident there. And here's what I would say about that is I'm not sure how important that will be this year. I think last year for that team, with kind of what you're missing on defense, you're missing some explosive elements on offense. Your special team's a little shaky. Like, the Bills couldn't afford to turn over the football, right? That was part of their winning script. They couldn't give away the ball. And so is this year's team different? Like, are they better defense and special teams so they can have a little bit more of a risk appetite offensively? I'm not sure, but there's a possibility of that. But also, last year was an outlier season. The Bills are not usually that good at taking care of the football, historically great. So, yeah, there's probably a regression there. But how important is that this year? I'm not sure. I think the overall team might be better and could onboard a few more giveaways if needed.
Yeah, the defensive stats there, those are so good because that has me think of a hockey comparison where, like this kind of shooting percentage in hockey where, like last year, Ryan McLeod for the Sabres shoots 20%. And I think everybody kind of expects, like, okay, that number is going to come down. That's unsustainable. But Alex Ovechkin was like 19% last year. There are some individuals where you would obviously say, okay, well, that guy could sustain it. Like, if you're able to do it year over year over year, it's harder to say that, it's going to come way back down. And what is that for a McDermott defense? Like, is that punching? Like, did you see them punching the ball out more than others? Like, is there something that they do differently that you see that would cause these numbers?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, number one, it starts with it being a major point of conversation all the time, right? If that's what you emphasize all the time, right, that's a big deal. So I think that's probably where it starts. But, I think structurally the intent and design of the Bills' defense is geared towards increasing your probabilities of advantageous things happening for the Bills. Like, there is going to be opportunities to get yards, right? That's every defense has weaknesses. But what the Bills want to do is they want to restrict and condense the field as much as they can based on spacing and, of course, tighten the screws in the red zone, those types of things that force you to do higher level of difficulty things to be successful. And the more times that you have to do that, the more likely it is that you can take away the football because you're restricting space or you're allowing the system to work for you where you're leveraging patterns, you're leveraging the field in a way that's going to create more opportunities to take away the football. And so I think it's the emphasis, it's the structure of the defense that leads to an unbelievable resume of sustained success taking away the football.
Joe Marino with us on the Wester Hotline. Your most recent episode, Joe, or the last one I listened to about the 5 players that you believe are underappreciated. The one guy I wanted to ask you about was Dawson Knox, because I do think there is a level of frustration with Knox, but it's from fans, but it's mostly I think it's just based in what his contract is. So for you, when you look at his role on the field, and if you want to add in the contract piece of it as well, why would you consider Knox to be an underappreciated player at this point?
Well, I mean, his resume is among the Bills' franchise tight ends is pretty freaking good. Third most receiving yards all time, second most receiving touchdowns all time. If he has 2 receiving touchdowns this year, he'll tie Pete Metzelaars for the most. It's the number 2 in playoff receiving touchdowns behind Andre Reed, 9 for Reed, 6 for Knox. But, look, no one's going to love that he's had 22 catches each of the last 2 years. No one's going to love that he gets paid $9.8 million a season, right? That's where things get fluky. And I'm not here to defend that he's paid appropriately or that, that's a fair number for him, because it's not. But if you can compartmentalize and appreciate the player that he is on the field, he's very useful. He played the second most snaps of any offensive skill player last year for an offense that has an argument to be the best in team history. So if you want to measure it by catches, okay, I'm not going to be able to win that argument. But if you want to measure it in terms of a player's role and what they mean for a run scheme and how they free up your other players to function more from the slot because of what they can do in line, that leads to a very good overall offense. Not very good, an elite NFL offense, one that might be the best the Bills have ever put on the field. Like, that matters a ton. And then there's the whole leadership component. Like, I think he is Bills DNA through and through. I think he's everything that McDermott and Beane want in a player. And this is really important. Like, you need players that set the tone, that set the standard, that are player-driven in terms of leadership. If the best teams in sports are not coach-driven, they're player-driven. And Knox is a standard setter for the Buffalo Bills. I mean, listen to the way the guy talked about Dalton Kincaid in the locker room cleanout. I mean, that's a guy that I want to go to war with. I want him in the foxhole with me. And so I think that there's so much emphasis on fantasy football and prop bets and box scores. And no, 22 catches each of the last 2 years is not going to make anyone excited. there's a lot more to playing the tight end position. In fact, they do way more blocking than they do pass catching, and the elements that Knox does provide is extremely valuable. And yeah, I can't defend the contract that, he was coming off of a 600-yard, 9-touchdown season. The Bills thought they had their long-term number one tight end, and then, they pivot, they go with Dalton Kincaid. They want to become more 12-oriented. It's changed, and he took a pay cut, and the pay cut was almost $5 million a year. But what it did is it made the contract less favorable for the Bills to ever get out of. And brace yourself, because he's got a $17 million cap hit next year. And my guess for what the Bills will do with that is extend him. I think they'll extend him and spread out that money across more years. I think Knox is probably going to be a Bill for life, and hopefully the contract can be more in line so that people can appreciate more of what he actually does provide this team, and not be caught up in, well, he only catches 20-25 passes a year.
Yeah, that feels like a good bet. The fantasy component of it too. The other reason that especially fantasy players would be frustrated with him is not only that he doesn't put up big numbers, but there is this feeling that he blocks Kincaid in some way, shape, or form. And for that, the blocking versus even maybe insulating Kincaid, because Kincaid's body broke down a little bit last year. He had an injury, right? And Knox does a lot of the dirty work. He lines up in line more often than Kincaid does. How do you see Knox for Kincaid? Blocking him at all, if that's true. The route participation rate is usually what gets referenced there, that Kincaid doesn't run as many routes as some of the top tight ends in the league. But then Knox also being there, I feel like does help Kincaid not have to do certain physical things that might, cause him to get injured.
Yeah, I think there's so many layers to that. That's a great question. I would say, first of all, I think it's the exact opposite. I think Knox frees up Kincaid. And step one in this, you talk about volume of routes. Yeah, Kincaid doesn't run the same amount of routes as other NFL tight ends. That's because the Bills are 26th, or whether they were either 26th or 28th in percentage of offensive plays that were passes last year. Right, I'm going to get that number. 28th percentage of plays that were passes last year. Josh Allen had 483 passing attempts last year. Right, they're just not a high volume passing offense. So, yeah, he's not going to have as many routes run. That's just logic. They were fifth in run rate. That's what the Bills do. They're a high volume run team. They're not a high volume pass team. And so, yes, the volume of routes will be lower. However, Dalton Kincaid last year was the highest targeted tight end in the NFL per route run. When the Bills throw the ball, they want to throw it to Dalton Kincaid. And nothing about Dawson Knox's existence hurts Kincaid's receiving profile. In fact, it puts him in a position where he can be moved around more because he doesn't have to play in line. So I think that's a misguided understanding on the relationship, and I think the context of the overall picture with the Bills offense really tells that story.
Joe Marino with us on Wednesday mornings, moving to Thursday this morning. Locked on Bills, Locked on NFL Scouting. He's around. You can definitely hear his stuff coming into training camp in a couple of weeks. Thanks, Joe, as always, and we'll talk next week.
All right, thanks for having me.
Joe Marino on the Western Hotline, at the Joe Marino, if you want to follow him there, and check out the podcast.